It was a dream of mine to travel to Albuquerque for the annual Hot Air Balloon Festival. It's where Dad proposed to Mom many moons ago. Mom was finally ready to take us there, just us girls. She wanted to relive the adventure. We decided to rent an RV from the trip from LA to New Mexico. My mom and I took turns driving, and it wasn't too shabby. An AC, kitchen, comfortable beds, and a bathroom. It was the perfect road trip. As we approached Albuquerque, it was already almost midnight. I knew we had to be getting closer to the campgrounds. I used Google Maps and followed the directions, but the GPS was lagging, and we ended up lost. We should have timed it better. Venturing out after sundown wasn't a smart idea. After circling around a few times, we managed to come across a beat-up shack with its lights on and music playing. Are you an idiot? Since when is stepping out of your vehicle in the middle of nowhere a good idea? I know we're getting close to the RV park. I just need to know which road will take us there. Mom, will you come with me? You are an idiot. Stop it, you two. We're here to enjoy each other's company. You can stay here if you want, Anna. We're only asking for directions. Fine, but bring the pepper spray and gun with you. My mom followed me while Anna sat in the driver's seat and kept watch, pistol in hand. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Maybe they're asleep. After what felt like an eternity, we heard footsteps slowly approaching the door. Who is it? You shouldn't be out here this late. I'm sorry, ma'am. We're a little lost and need to know how to get to the nearest RV park. Well, I'm not opening my door. It's not safe at these hours. What do you mean? You're not from around here, so listen closely. Drive left for about 2 miles until you reach an intersection. Then make a left for another mile. Then a right, and then an immediate left. You'll see the signs. You got that? Yeah, typed it out on my notes app. Thank you, kind stranger. And one more thing. If you hear any screams, if you see any animals, keep on driving. Don't stop. Don't look at it. Okay. A witch-like creature roams these parts. One that can shapeshift into any animal. Don't acknowledge it when you see it. Have a good night. And make sure you don't turn right at the intersection. We got back in the RV and Mom read out the directions while I drove in the dark. This is really dangerous. It's pitch black. We have the moon and the stars. It'll be alright. Donna is an excellent driver and is really careful. My palms were sweating, thinking about what that woman told us. I made sure to keep my eyes focused ahead and drove slowly. Which way now? Right turn after this intersection. You know, if we die out here, no one is going to die. Stop being so negative. You're only making things worse. Excuse me? This is all your fault. You're the one who took a long time taking pictures of the Grand Canyon. Guess what? No one on Instagram gives a shit about where you've been. You little fart face. Ooh, fart face, so badass. Stop! What was that? Shh! I stopped the car and looked ahead, trying to figure out if I hit something. Can one of you look out the back window to see if I hit something? Fine. Anna walked to the back of the RV and looked out the window. Drive! Now! Go, go, go! I stepped on the pedal and sped away. Anna ran to Mom and started hyperventilating. She looked like she just saw a ghost and told me to keep driving. Luckily, after more circling around and a minor hiccup, we finally reached the RV park. I was happy to see other people finishing up their barbecues and cleaning up. I was tired and looking forward to bed. Just a few more hours until sunrise and the Hot Air Balloon Festival. Dad would have loved to be here. A tinge of sadness washed over me as I remembered his passing, yet I dared not mention it to either of them in fear of upsetting them. We were doing this in his memory and felt he would appreciate us remembering him this way. I got ready for bed and was going to take out the garbage. "Don't go out there. What's up with you?" Anna looked really pale. She explained what she saw earlier. "It was the scariest thing I've ever seen." As soon as I looked out the window, I saw this man crouched down on the road. And in the blink of an eye, the man was gone, and in his place was this beast on all fours chasing us. But it was as if it were half man, half beast, with wolf skin and a wolf head with glowing eyes and sharp claws. "Is that why you screamed?" "What? I didn't scream." I could have sworn I heard her scream in the RV. We tried to comfort her, and Mom made her some hot chocolate. I debated whether or not I should step outside, but decided to just do it, since I had been putting it off for far too long. My main obligations during the trip were driving and garbage. I stepped outside and looked for the dumpster. I ran as fast as I could there and back. But when I was approaching the RV, I noticed scratches on the back of the vehicle and what looked like blood. I suddenly felt like I was being watched, but shrugged it off. As I was entering the RV, I saw something. From my peripheral vision, in the darkness, I saw an animal unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I quickly shut the door. "What's wrong with you now?" "I saw it. We need to leave." "I agree." "What? But you haven't experienced the hot air balloons yet." "But it's okay. If you don't feel safe, then it's best we leave." Anna and I looked at each other and felt guilty. Mom has been really depressed since Dad's passing. This trip was mainly for her. We decided that we'd leave right after the festival and headed to bed. We woke up before sunrise. That way we would be the first guests at the festival and find a place to park the RV. It was Mom's turn to drive, and I slept in a little more. That was until I immediately got out of bed. Mom was driving as fast as she could and screaming. Anna and I ran to the passenger seat. The creature. I looked away as soon as I saw it and yelled for them to do the same. But I'll never forget what I saw. In that split second, I got a good look at it. It looked really odd. It was as if a man had taken a wolf, skinned it, and wore its fur and head as clothing. And he had really, really long limbs, running on its hind legs at the same speed as the RV. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I thought I was going to have a heart attack when I heard it scratching on the side of the RV. Mom sped up and started praying as loud as she could. Anna was crying hysterically. I kept reminding her to breathe and to keep her eyes on me. I looked at it for a second and saw its bones crack and reform as it started running on all fours. Its body was all covered in fur now, and in about 3 seconds was now what appeared to be a wolf. And it miraculously ran off into the woods out of view. A few seconds later, we heard the police sirens and were pulled over for speeding. I never thought I'd be so relieved to be in trouble with the law. We explained what we saw, and the policeman had a serious look on his face. He decided to not give us a ticket and let us go with just a warning. To get out of the area as soon as possible and to not look back. I'm sorry, guys, but we're not going to the festival. Mom kept driving until we were out of Albuquerque, and she didn't stop. We should have taken that left turn at Albuquerque. Maybe this could have all been avoided. As Lena and I made our way from I-287, we approached the Tappan Zee Bridge in Westchester, New York. The bridge crossed over from Nyack into Tarrytown. I kept our Jeep Cherokee to the leftmost lane to keep her view limited to the water some 100 feet below. Lena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Lena, it's okay. We're almost there. You know, we could have gone anywhere you wanted for Halloween. I hate bridges. Not sure why they bother me so much. Just know I hate them. She appeared to let the feeling of anxiety pass over her like a breeze when we got off the bridge. Besides, Alex, I know you've always wanted to come here. We shouldn't let my anxiety dictate our lives forever. We traveled through Tarrytown and into Sleepy Hollow. I couldn't wait to explore. The movie and novel The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving was a favorite since childhood. Likewise, the tale of Ichabod Crane appealed to me. The leaves had already begun their transformation. Bright reds, oranges, and yellows were everywhere. The town was beaming with Halloween decorations, and there wasn't a single porch that lacked a skeleton or carved pumpkin. We finally reached our Airbnb. I finalized our itinerary, pulling out the must-see locations based on the book, while Lena freshened up. That evening, rested and ready to go, we headed to the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. It was still dusk as we visited the resting place of Washington Irving. Many tourists were already there when we arrived, eagerly chatting about the landmarks, and of course, the Headless Horseman, probably the most sought-after equestrian in town. We stopped and listened in on a tour guide explaining the legend. The legend of Sleepy Hollow's Headless Horseman dates back to the American Revolution. Many say the Horseman was a German soldier who served the British Army during the war. He was killed during the Battle of White Plains in October of 1776, decapitated by an American cannonball. The shattered remains of his head were left on the battlefield, while his comrades carried his body away. Eventually, they buried him in the cemetery of the Old Dutch Church of Sleepy Hollow, from which he rises as a malevolent ghost, furiously seeking his lost head. As thrilling as the story was, it was all fiction. So, knowing this, Lena chuckled at the terrified visitors. These people are acting ridiculous. They actually believe the Headless Horseman is real. It's only a book, people. We both came here to have a good time. Even though we found ourselves holding kerosene lamps in a cemetery, it all still seemed so trope-like and cliché. The lamps lit our way while the tour guide showed us some of the famous residents laid to rest. William Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and Elizabeth Arden were popular stops along the way. The night air grew cooler since we were, after all, near the Hudson River. Finally, we wandered away from the group out of boredom and made our way into the darkness of the cemetery towards the bridge. Lena shivered and pulled her hands inside her jacket. Nope, not going near that old bridge. It's not even the original one, don't worry. It grew eerie as we watched the lights from the group drift away, while the moonlight peeked through the trees and across the headstones. We walked a little further past the bridge. Then, out of nowhere, we heard the whinny of a horse. We looked back and Lena screamed at the shape that loomed over a black steed. I rolled my eyes as it ran across the bridge. It was an actor meant to come out and scare the large group of visitors and sightseers. A unique opportunity to ride across the cemetery to heighten the already festive mood. Lena grabbed my right arm and interlocked it with hers. It's nothing, Lena, just an actor on a horse. I felt the need to play along and yelled out, I say, good man, for whom are you looking? The headless rider slowly trotted towards us. He was holding a jack-o'-lantern. The tour guide and visitors are just ahead. We broke off from the group to have a little time to explore the cemetery ourselves and frolic amidst the tombstones. The horseman held his steed in place. It began to sway uncontrollably, whinnying in protest. Then it stood up on its back legs. The headless rider stood tall upon the steed and held on tightly. I was impressed. The actor was giving a very convincing recount of that glorious night chasing Ichabod Crane. Let's get out of here. We both started backing away, uncertain of the rider's intentions. I could feel no vibrations, but hear the large animal's hoofbeats as it began to canter towards us. Lena pulled her arm away and ran towards the bouncing lanterns, hundreds of feet ahead in a tinge of panic. I ran towards her to catch up. "Lena!" I exclaimed and began to run after her. From behind me, I could hear the hooves of the oncoming horse. The steed was in full gallop and heading straight at me, its rider bearing down its weight on the animal, pushed it to accelerate. I turned and watched in awe as the breeze made his flowing robe wave like a flag. He hurled the pumpkin right at me, but luckily I dodged in time. I continued my sprint towards Lena. A maniacal laugh grew from behind me. Lena ran further ahead, now within earshot of the tourist group. I could hear her scream at the visitors, who turned to see who had been crying out for help. But instead, she turned and pointed back at the Headless Horseman in pursuit of me. I ran faster, only to notice the horse's snout in my peripheral vision. The horse let out a large breath, and I felt the kick of the horseman's boot upon the back of my head as I fell to the ground. My kerosene lamp flew ahead of me, and I lay there, staring at the night sky in pain and disbelief. The group focused their attention on the headless rider as it kicked and pushed the steed faster ahead. They watched it approach and pass by them as if it were some sort of reenactment. Finally, the horse turned around and stood upon its back hooves while letting out a loud, raucous bray to warn the visitors. The sting of the horseman's boot was far from just performance art. It hurt. Lena ran towards me, as did the tour guide and a few other visitors who came to see if they could help. A thick line of blood ran down my face and neck. Everyone looked terrified. "Alex, are you okay?" From behind her, I saw the steed run at us again. I reached over, grabbing Lena's lamp, as the horse charged and tossed it at the rider. The lantern shattered across the rider's broad shoulders and appeared to catch on fire. The group stood in awe and applauded, watching the headless horseman ride away, trying to douse the fire that had taken to its clothes. Many had wondered if this was part of the retelling of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, but I knew he was real. I felt his anger and disdain manifest in the blood he drew. I didn't need anyone telling me the experience was fake or part of some staged event. I could tell by the pain in my head that the Headless Horseman was real, and we were trespassing on hallowed ground. Never in my life had I ever thought I could withstand a Halloween movie marathon. I ended up watching 11 films in a matter of 48 hours. I was glad that Michael Myers was in fact a fictional character, even though some say that he was actually from Haddonfield, New Jersey, which wasn't too far from me. The devilish young boy slaughtered his sister with a large knife on Halloween. Afterward, Michael spent many years in a mental institution, and on one rainy evening, stole a car and escaped into the darkness. And from then on, he hunted his sister Laurie for most of the films. John Carpenter's famous horror series was well known for its gory scenes and random killings. I felt as if each sequel had to find a way to top the previous one. Ellie, Bill, and I stepped outside into the cool evening air in Haddonfield, New Jersey. There was a Halloween party at our friend Matt's house. Matt always had the best parties ever since we were kids. Unfortunately, he was too busy to join our Halloween movie marathon. I was glad they were finally over, and looked forward to hanging out with friends from school. Those movies were cool. Michael always found a way to survive. Except for that third one. What was that all about? Yeah, the third one made no sense to me. Halloween 3 didn't even have Michael Myers in it. Nothing to do with the first two. Must have been a money grab, Bill said. I must admit, there were some creepy moments, and that music, ugh, I cringed. Ahead of us, the shape of a man stood staring at us. I hesitated for a second, then yelled at Bill and Ellie. It's him. Look. I pointed at the shape. They both raised their heads to see what I had screamed about, but nothing was there. It's a movie, Judy. Michael Myers doesn't exist. Ellie smiled. We turned the corner and were on Matt Street. Matt decorated his front yard like a cemetery. Several classmates were entering the house for the party inside. Bill, Eddie, and I made our way through the cemetery and onto the front steps. At the front door stood a Michael Myers. It looked so much like him, I felt like screaming. But before I could, Matt pulled off his mask and yelled, "Trick or treat!" Matt, just like you'd always have a trick up your sleeve. Your costume's sick. We spent the past 2 days watching all 11 movies. Nearly scared Judy out of her mind. I promise, Judy, I won't wear the mask when you're around, Matt assured me. It's okay, Matt. I have to remember that Michael Myers is only a fictional character. I went inside the house. Many of our friends were dressed in creepy outfits and enjoying the party. Matt put his mask back on. He continued to greet others who walked up to the porch. A visitor had arrived, dressed as Michael Myers. How original. The visitor tilted his head and pulled a large carving knife out from his front pocket. Matt stood and inspected the knife as he moved it above his head. That looks real. Where'd you find that? With that, the stranger grabbed Matt and lifted him off the ground, and with a single motion, plunged the giant knife into Matt's throat. Bill, Ellie, and I ran out the back of his home and down the street as fast as we could. We hurried back home. Kids were screaming up and down the street, terrified at the murder that just occurred. Bill stopped to assure Ellie and me that it was all just a prank. But then, the killer appeared from behind him, jabbing the knife through one side of his right ear and out of the other side. Bill, stunned, stood bleeding until he collapsed. Ellie and I screamed. We took off looking for anyone who might be outside who could help us. We knew from the films that Michael was always looking to exterminate as many victims as he possibly could. Eddie and I took off towards Main Street. A police car sped past us towards Matt's house. Ellie stopped to take a breather, and I sat across from her on the grass. Was that Michael Myers? It appears to have been. I thought you guys said he was just a fictional character. Suddenly, all the blood left Ellie's face, and she screamed for us to run. And in a split second, Ellie's decapitated head flew onto the street in front of me. Her blood splashed on the road and onto my face. I looked back to find Michael Myers standing directly behind me, with a knife aimed at the top of my skull. I screamed at the top of my lungs, waiting to feel the steel of the knife pierce my head. But nothing. I looked around to find Michael Myers had vanished. For some reason, he turned around and headed towards a group of teenagers, and I ran straight home. Michael Myers had returned to Haddonfield, and no one knew how or why. All I knew was that I had to end him the same way he ended my friends. In a girl world, Halloween is the one night a year when a girl can dress like a total slut, and no other girls can say anything about it. The Mean Girls quote was forever drilled into my memory. My costume was going to be nice and simple. There's never enough time to put together the perfect costume. Dana and I had realized this since, once again, we were running behind schedule and our Halloween party was a week away. I'd rather not throw on lingerie and cat ears, but it requires zero planning. No, dressing up is serious business. I want to dress as a corpse bride. So we hit up all the local thrift shops and boutiques in search of a vintage-style wedding dress. And we didn't have much luck. Go figure. Either people weren't getting married often enough, or the dresses we did find were hideous. I'm sure I can ask my mom if you can borrow her dress. That won't work. It needs to be distressed. And I'm going to stain it with coffee, Dana said, defeated and ready to go. But right as we were about to leave, we saw one of the employees holding up a wedding dress. Dana immediately ran over to her. Yeah, we just received this box today. A lot of beautiful dresses too. Dana grabbed the dress and went to the fitting room to try it on. It was perfect, so she bought it and we left. Halloween night arrived, and Dana couldn't wait to show off her costume. She spent all day wearing the dress and tailoring it to perfection. It was pretty terrifying. Someone knocked on our front door. I'm going to put the finishing touches on my dress and makeup. Go ahead and let the guests in. I'll be down in a minute. I ran downstairs and let the guests in, and we had a full house in no time. I was handing out hors d'oeuvres when someone asked where Dana was. I looked at the time, and it had been an hour since I saw Dana getting ready upstairs. I left the party to go check on her. And when I opened the door, she was laying down on her bed, just like a corpse. Looks so realistic. Great job. I should tell Eric to come up here and bring you back to life. Silence. She laid there, still, and I realized she wasn't breathing. I tried to wake her up, but nothing. So I screamed for help. A few guests entered the room and laughed and clapped, thinking it was all an act. I screamed for them to call an ambulance, and that's when everyone started panicking. The ambulance arrived and took Dana's body away. After investigation, we found out that the wedding dress was poisoned by embalming fluid, which stopped Dana's blood flow after hours of wearing it. Its previous owner wore it to her wedding and funeral, until it was stolen from her corpse. From the moment I arrived, I knew Salem, Massachusetts was a special place. A cozy coastal town that was both charming and inviting. The witch trials of the 1600s made Salem the perfect place to visit during Halloween. I walked around town, taking in the various attractions as if some invisible string guided me. History was practically oozing from the walls, and from the ground, the blood of the innocent. It was a town infamous for the hanging and burning of those reported to have practiced black magic or witchcraft. I felt like I was coming home. I enjoyed the company of tourists, dressed in black robes and pointy hats in populated areas, but felt strangely comfortable in several of the locations where the trials took place and the executions carried out. As I stepped foot in the Salem Witch Trials Memorial, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Welcome home, dear." I shrugged it off and read the names. No one knew for sure why these small North Shore town settlers would condemn and convict their own. Yet the elders did just that. As I stood there, a sudden chill gave me goosebumps, and I collapsed to the ground. A dream, almost like a movie, began to play in my subconscious, and it felt like déjà vu. I could see the elders packed inside a courthouse, reading the charges to men and women. They were reportedly practicing the devil's work by using black magic to impose their will on the townsfolk. I could see the elders casting judgment upon the accused and reading their deeds aloud to the court, then proclaiming a punishment upon them, which meant execution. On this particular day, there was a middle-aged woman sitting with her head down in shame and tears. She pleaded not guilty to all their accusations and charges, saying that her specter didn't appear to Martha Spragg or Rose Foster in the middle of the night, and that she didn't torment them. A moment later, I was transported. I stood in front of a tall tree with a large rope looped around a sturdy branch. I could see the woman bound by her hands with rope and dragged up a flight of stairs to a platform. Her face was dirty and her hair unkempt. She knew she had little time left and zero sympathy from the growing crowd. She cried in protest. "I swear this day that many others like me will visit this very spot and know the injustice you set upon me." A man placed the rope around her neck. An elder approached with a scroll and read out the charges aloud. "Mary Parker of Andover, you have been charged with practicing black magic and witchcraft. As you know, anyone who carries forth the devil's work is subject to death. May God take pity upon your soul." With that, the executioner tightened the noose around her neck. Mary screamed a loud no. She pushed her body weight backward, hoping to move the executioner away. The executioner kicked the stool. She dangled with her hands bound behind her back and fell with a violent snap. Mary's feet kicked violently at the night air, and she slumped, swaying back and forth as the rope tightened. She gagged and kicked. After a few minutes, her body expired, and the execution was complete. When I came back to my senses, I was standing over Mary Parker's memorial. Her public hanging took place on September 22nd, 1962. It was so surreal. I shuddered at the thought of such cruelty by the hands of men and women she may have trusted and loved. That night, I stayed at a local bed and breakfast. I woke up early the next morning, had breakfast, and headed out. Last night, Mary's death invaded my dreams. At one point, I could have sworn I woke up and saw her standing in the corner of my room, just staring at me.
What they did to me, to us, was inexcusable. Arresting me when I had just lost my husband, accusing me of having afflicted victims with my touch, torturing me by examining every inch of my body for the mark of the devil, then murdering me. They tried to erase my bloodline, but they failed. Take what is rightfully yours, dear, and do not be ashamed of who you are. I am always watching. My soul will live on for generations to come.
I felt some strange connection to it all. I just couldn't figure out what it might be. As I was walking in town, the voice returned. "Go to the witch house." I headed straight there. The voice was strong and persistent. The witch house tour had started just minutes before, and I would need to sit and wait in an area until the group finished. As I stood waiting, I heard a strange noise. I turned around to find a book on the floor. I opened it and noted that it spoke of the witches by name and gave a brief overview of their crimes. I turned to the page that listed Mary Parker. It said that she was a widow during the time of the trials and from Andover. She also had a daughter named Sarah, 2 nieces, and a grandniece named Rebecca Johnson who were wrongfully accused and arrested for witchcraft. Luckily, they weren't executed. This stuck with me. I ran to my laptop and used websites that would help me piece together her possible genealogy. There was a Parker family tree that stemmed from Andover, showing the branches of children and grandchildren. I followed the tree down almost 300 years and felt a chill run up my spine. At the very last line was my grandmother's name and photograph. This is what happened on Halloween night 3 years ago, when one of my friends, well, you'll see. Even though me and my friends were adults, we still loved everything that came with Halloween. Beth loved the candy, I loved scary stuff, and Mindy, well, she just loved dressing up. Every year, the mayor would set up this elaborate parade and carnival right in the middle of town. It had amazing food, decorations, hired actors who would scare you, and the main attraction, the House of Horrors. Basically, you would go in and you'd walk through a maze, all the while being scared by skeletons, werewolves, and vampires. Yeah, it would normally be a lot of fun, but that particular year, it was something different. Come on, guys, what's taking you so long? I asked them while pacing back and forth in the living room. We were dressing up as the Sanderson sisters. Okay, we're ready, Mindy said as they both came down the stairs. Come on, let's go already, I said while opening the front door. As we walked out, we saw that everyone was outside. The kids were trick-or-treating, and the adults were all headed the same direction. We finally got to the carnival. The House of Horrors looked amazing. We went straight in. This is better than last year, Mindy said, and she was right. The corpses and puddles of fake blood had a really nice aesthetic. For Halloween, of course. There were also paid actors, scaring us and jumping out from the dark corners. Psst, we heard as we were walking. We looked around, but couldn't see anything. It was too dark. Psst, we heard it again. Mindy looked to her right, and a guy came out of the shadows. He was beautiful. The 3 of us were speechless. He had a pale complexion, long hair, blue eyes, and full lips. He was also really tall. So, you're a vampire, Mindy swooned. He also had a pair of fake fangs. Yeah, you look delicious, he said. Guys, you go ahead. I'm gonna hang out here for a while, Mindy told us. We didn't want to get between her and this beautiful guy, who seemed to like her, so we went ahead. After about 10 minutes, we were at the end of the maze, and the exit was right in front of us. But no sign of Mindy. Let's call her, I said while taking out my phone, but she didn't answer. Come on, we should go back for her, Beth told me, and I agreed. We did just that. As we walked, we noticed that the floor was wet. It was dark, so we couldn't see where the water was coming from. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. We both screamed. It was blood. So much blood was at our feet. Having the flashlight still turned on, we took a step to the right and accidentally pointed the phone towards a dark corner. There, with her eyes open and 2 holes on the side of her neck, laid Mindy. She looked dehydrated and pale. I started shaking her so that she'd come to her senses, but it was too late. Mindy was dead. We called the police, and after they did a full autopsy at the hospital, they saw that she was completely drained of her blood. After hearing that, Beth and I looked at each other with the same thought. The handsome stranger was a vampire, and he murdered our friend. This is a story about what happened on Halloween, before my husband and I decided to move out of our new house. I was 32 years old when I experienced something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. We had just moved into this really nice neighborhood. After finally finding a house we absolutely loved. "We're going to be so happy here," I said to my husband, while we spent our first night in the new place. It was around sometime in October, not long before Halloween night. We managed to make some friends on our block, and we learned that everyone decorated their houses during spooky season. Not wanting to be left behind, we decided to go shopping for some skeletons, pumpkins, and cobwebs. Anyway, time went on, and fast forward to a few weeks later, Halloween. The houses on our block looked really terrifying, but it was still daylight, and I could only imagine what they would look like at night. We didn't have any kids of our own. We tried, but it just didn't happen. Thus, our love for kids was immense. That's why we had several large bowls of candy ready to go. Our wish was not to run out and leave some of the kids behind. Finally, evening came and our first trick-or-treater. It was a little girl, accompanied by her dad. "Hello, what a beautiful princess costume," I said, smiling at her. "Thank you," she said, while replying with an even bigger smile. We gave her some candy and a feeling of joy came over us. The night went on and several other kids came, dressed up as vampires, witches, and superheroes. But the last kid that came, he was a little bit different. "Trick or treat," we heard a small voice say. I opened the door and there he stood. A small boy with a pale face, wearing an old-timey costume. He looked like a child from the 1940s. "What an original costume," I said, while handing him the bowl of candy so he could take as much as he wanted. "It's not a costume. Where's Matilda? Isn't she home?" the kid asked me. "Matilda? There's no Matilda living here," I said while looking confused. "Oh, yes she is. She's my mom's friend, and Andrew's mom. They live here," the kid said. I didn't know how to respond, so I just gave him more candy as he stood there. "I'm sorry, there isn't anyone by that name here," I told him nicely. "What's your name?" I asked. He paused for a moment, and then said, "Hector. Okay, I'm gonna go now," and left. The next day, I went outside to get the mail, and my neighbor was on her front porch. I went over to talk to her. "Hey, do you know Matilda with a kid named Andrew?" "There was a kid asking for her last night," I said. My neighbor was old, over 80, so I guess she would know what the kid was talking about. She thought about it for a while. "I remember when I was young, there was a fire on this block. A big one. 2 families died. And if I remember correctly, the houses were yours and the one next to it. If I'm not mistaken, a woman named Matilda lived in the house you moved into. And she did have a boy. They were close friends with the next-door neighbors, the Anderson family.
They also had a kid. His name started with an H, I believe. Hector.
When I heard the name Hector, I rushed home to research the fire. I found pictures of the family, and there he was. The 8-year-old boy named Hector. A picture of him looking identical to the kid I saw the night before. It wasn't long until my husband and I moved out of that house, hoping to never experience that sort of thing again.